By the end of this video, it should be clear why it might be important to question at least these three former GTS Securities employees concerning MMTLP: Sandy Lionetti, Ryan Sheftel, and Paul Adcock. To make it so, I'd like to begin with the analogy of a student and their permanent record. We all know that if a student has behavioral issues, they go into the student's permanent record, and it follows them to every school they attend. FINRA's broker check is similar to a permanent record because this is where you can see the behavior issues of FINRA's member firms and their employees. But while broker check exists supposedly to keep investors informed and therefore protected, we're also offered a glimpse into what appears to be favoritism and partiality. This is evident when you know that Ari Rubenstein was in FINRA's market surveillance advisory group for several years. If all disclosures entered into FINRA's broker check were only initiated by FINRA, then the relationship between GTS and FINRA could potentially result in a form of bias or regulatory capture. But since multiple exchanges such as the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ enter their findings concerning a broker's activity into FINRA's broker check as well, it should serve as a fail-safe to a degree. From the perspective of regulators, you would think that if a broker was engaged in manipulation on the NYSE, it might be prudent to investigate their activities on the other exchanges. The fact that the OTC isn't as regulated as the NYSE, the idea of being involved in manipulation only on the NYSE is short-sighted and incredibly irresponsible if your role is to protect investors. In April 2023, GTS Securities negotiated a settlement to end a multi-year investigation, agreeing to an acceptance waiver and consent with the New York Stock Exchange. The fallout? Fines totaling over $10 million. But how did we get here? Rewind to September 2016. For nearly 6 years, GTS allegedly engaged in various forms of market manipulation, spoofing or placing orders with the intention of cancelling them before execution to potentially manipulate the market price. Wash trading, a practice of buying and selling the same security to give a misleading impression of market activity. And trading ahead of DMM orders, a move that uses information about upcoming orders from the designated market maker for personal gain. But the list doesn't end there. GTS also faced accusations of supervisory failures, failure to comply with NYSE and ARCA rules, and obstruction of the investigation. And all this happened during nearly all of the time that GTS operated on the NYSE. What's more, the NYSE investigation into GTS's activities began in 2021, suggesting that up to 4 years of manipulation went either ignored or undetected. Once detected, the investigation and subsequent sanctioning took a further 2 years. Now, consider this. The NYSE is an exchange known for its strict regulatory oversight and transparency. Yet, GTS allegedly engaged in market manipulation on this platform, while seemingly adhering to the rules on the OTC, a platform with less oversight and transparency. Interestingly, GTS and its CEO, Ari Rubenstein, served in regulatory roles with FINRA, the organization that oversees the OTC. This, alongside the firm's involvement with the Modern Markets Initiative, an organization co-founded by Rubenstein to advocate for high-frequency trading, paints a picture of a company well-versed in regulatory norms and practices. Yet, despite its regulatory roles, GTS found itself in the middle of a scandal that raises questions about its practices and ethics. An acceptance waiver and consent is not an admission of guilt, but GTS's offer to pay a hefty fine and submit to 18 months of third-party monitoring speaks volumes. Furthermore, 2 GTS employees, Yaron Katz and Jenny Zhou, were each fined $150,000. The question remains, did they act independently, and if so, why are they still with GTS? This sordid tale of financial machinations and regulatory oversights serves as a stark reminder of the potential pitfalls in our financial systems. It's crucial to maintain vigilance, transparency, and accountability to ensure a fair and equitable financial market. We're close to discussing the March 13th, 2024 disclosure in which FINRA finally jointly initiated a GTS disclosure along with the NASDAQ. This was FINRA's first against GTS Securities after the U3 halt, and FINRA's first since November 2020. What was the 2020 disclosure about? Oh, GTS just claimed that for more than a year, from April 2014 to July 2015, they failed to locate shares related to their own proprietary short selling, not from market making. The reason, according to GTS, is that the shares they sold short were incorrectly labeled easy to borrow. GTS was fined $70,000, $30,000 of which was payable to FINRA, as this was a joint disclosure with the CBOE exchange. What you see here from the CBOE disclosure is that it was initiated in 2017. This is a year after GTS Securities became a designated market maker on the NYSE, and presumably the year Ari Rubenstein joined FINRA's Market Surveillance Advisory Group. This showed that if GTS exhibited a certain behavior on one exchange, it was worth the time to see if they were engaging in that same behavior on the other platforms. The most recent March 13th disclosure is due to erroneous orders and a lack of risk management from GTS, spanning from October 2019 all the way to March 2024. This is a major issue because without risk management, a broker-dealer could place erroneous orders or engage in manipulative trading, leading to financial losses for themselves and potentially disrupting the market as a whole. GTS agreed to an acceptance waiver and consent, resulting in them only having to pay $100,000. The interesting thing about this latest disclosure is that it is very similar to another recent December 2023 GTS disclosure initiated by NYSE ARCA. GTS paid $75,000 as a result of this acceptance waiver and consent because they lacked the proper risk management necessary to prevent erroneous orders, a violation of multiple Exchange Act rules including 15C3-5B and C1 and NYSE ARCA rules. This brings us back to the point about GTS being bold enough to engage in manipulation on the NYSE while seemingly being honest Boy Scouts on the OTC. I always thought that the NYSE ARCA disclosure that resulted in the $10 million fine would have resulted in FINRA looking closely into the activity of GTS regarding OTC securities, but there was never a similar disclosure initiated by FINRA. I think the fact that at least two OTC issuers, GTII and NWBO, both named GTS among others in spoofing lawsuits, might have showed FINRA exactly where to look in order to make a similar determination as NYSE ARCA. It hasn't happened though. It's been nearly a year since that disclosure, but FINRA did jointly initiate this latest disclosure along with NASDAQ. Did FINRA do so because they'd appear to be showing special treatment to GTS if they didn't? Could it be that FINRA noticed the hundreds of social media posts calling them out for seemingly not investigating GTS? The answer to those questions aren't even important though. What's important is recognizing that these most recent GTS disclosures help to shine a light on what appears to be the true nature of how they conduct business, from failures to locate related to their own proprietary trading, spoofing, wash trading, trading ahead of designated market maker orders for their own profit, all the way to erroneous orders due to a lack of risk management, which by the way can possibly create a smokescreen to hide counterfeit/naked short sales. Being that this has gone on since 2019, at any point since then, GTS could have easily claimed that their fails to locate borrowed shares were simply the result of errors. This makes it harder for regulators or observers to distinguish between genuine mistakes and intentional counterfeit/naked shorting. More than a year after FINRA U3 halted trading in MMTLP, the GTS disclosures in FINRA's broker check continue to reveal further details. Not only can GTS Securities be linked to the earliest and final trades of MMTLP, but their permanent records show that they were likely involved in a variety of manipulation during the same time frame that MMTLP was allegedly manipulated. This is all circumstantial evidence that justifies a thorough look into GTS Securities and their trading history. The disappearance of Ari Rubenstein shortly before the U3 halt only adds to the suspicion. And if that wasn't enough, being able to link everyone that has spoken out against the MMTLP community back to Ari Rubenstein and his companies is a dead giveaway. It's important to understand that highlighting these particular disclosures alone don't do enough to cause concern. In the course of the market-making business, especially when you rely entirely on technology and the inability of human counterparts to effectively monitor every transaction, there's bound to be some honest mistakes. However, what we should have learned from Bernie Madoff's relationship with FINRA's predecessor is that any individuals from FINRA's member firms portraying themselves as being devoted to stopping fraud should also be given an equal amount of scrutiny. On February 23, 2017, the CBOE exchange initiated a disclosure against GTS Securities for failing to locate shares related to their proprietary short-selling activities, and improperly relying on a bona fide market-making exception that didn't apply to the transactions in question. These were transactions that took place from April 2014 to July 2015. The CBOE initiated the disclosure in 2017, which resulted in a censure and monetary fine in the year 2020. Highlighting this disclosure is important because FINRA jointly files a practically identical disclosure as the CBOE, establishing that there is a degree of coordination that occurs between the exchanges and FINRA. This then brings us to April of 2023, when the NYSE and NYSE ARCA jointly filed disclosures against GTS Securities, resulting in over $10 million in fines. This investigation began in 2021, and according to the disclosure, the acts allegedly carried out by GTS occurred at least from 2016 to 2022. The disclosures don't mention the following terms, but if you read them, they accurately describe a form of spoofing, wash trading, supervisory failures, trading ahead of designated market maker orders, and impeding an investigation. These are all serious crimes on their own, let alone as a cocktail. So it's no surprise that GTS negotiated to pay $10 million to make the problem go away, along with fines totaling $150,000 each for 2 GTS employees that seemingly took on the blame. What I find perplexing is that in nearly a year since these disclosures, FINRA hasn't initiated anything similar. The NYSE and ARCA disclosures showed FINRA exactly what to look for on the OTC, but the lack of any disclosures leaves the impression that GTS Securities takes more pride in respecting the rules of the less regulated OTC than they do the New York Stock Exchange. What made matters worse is that in addition to the obvious attention garnered by such a high fine, GTS Securities was also named in at least 2 spoofing lawsuits by issuers of securities that traded on the OTC during the same relevant time frame. So on one side, you have issuers that represent the investors that FINRA claims to protect, filing lawsuits against GTS Securities for manipulation. And on the other side, you have exchanges that investigated GTS for several years for similar manipulation, clearly finding something due to the size of the fine and the resulting 18 months of required monitoring, but not a peep from FINRA. One might assume that maybe FINRA's relationship with the CBOE exchange is different than their relationship with the NYSE and NYSE ARCA. But in December of 2023, it was a disclosure initiated by NYSE ARCA that pointed out that GTS Securities failed to establish, document and maintain a system of risk management which allowed for erroneous orders to be entered related to their proprietary trading activities. 3 months later, in March 2024, FINRA and NASDAQ jointly filed 2 nearly identical disclosures to the NYSE ARCA disclosure from December. This confirms that it's perfectly logical for FINRA to observe a disclosure initiated by the NYSE and/or NYSE ARCA, and to investigate to see if those rules are being broken or that manipulation is taking place on the OTC. Seeing that Ari Rubenstein has been in FINRA's Market Surveillance Advisory Group since at least 2017, and observing the disclosures initiated by FINRA in that time frame, you'll notice that there were no GTS Securities disclosures from FINRA unless they were filed jointly and seemingly first initiated by other exchanges. This would be perfectly fine if GTS were an upstanding firm, but clearly from the few disclosures covered here, GTS has always been involved in some sort of rule-breaking and/or market manipulation from 2014 to 2024. How is it that FINRA has been unable to find any of it on their own? Is it a coincidence that much of their rule-breaking is linked to their proprietary trading activity? If you recall, one of the reasons FINRA gave for not wanting to release blue sheet data was to protect proprietary trading techniques of their member firms. That stance is contrary to what we see in GTS disclosures on FINRA's own broker check database. There, we can see multiple examples of their trading strategies being made public due to the fact that they were breaking the rules. Seeing that FINRA would work so hard to keep the data private, combined with the fact that they never seem to find any wrongdoing on behalf of GTS, it really gives the appearance that their relationship to one another might be interfering with GTS being fairly and adequately regulated. NASDAQ, the NYSE/NYSE ARCA, and the CBOE exchanges also serve as their own self-regulated organizations with their own rules, which are very similar to those of their counterparts. The obvious difference between these exchanges and FINRA is that, to my knowledge, Ari Rubenstein has never been in their market surveillance advisory group. The MMTLP fiasco is very much one of the biggest current events related to the stock market as a whole, and it's practically impossible that the members of these other regulatory bodies aren't aware of the situation. So why haven't those regulatory bodies spoken up? Could it be due to their relationship to FINRA? Not everyone likes when I go into the weeds, but for the most part, when I do so, I'm just making observations and asking questions. This is Sandy Lionetti. She was the managing director at GTS Securities from September 2016 to July 2022. According to her profile on the GTS website, Lionetti's role as managing director seems to have been centered around human resources and workplace culture. Though not mentioned in her profile, a managing director for a high-frequency trading firm can also include trading strategy and oversight. Her profile indicates her experience with portfolio optimization and risk management for institutional investors. Just by observing Lionetti's experience, the typical role of a managing director for a high-frequency trading firm, the known issues that GTS has had with risk management, the fact that Lionetti left GTS around the time that it was made known that MMTLP would go the privatization route, and the fact that her departure wasn't publicized, it gives the impression that she didn't leave GTS on the best terms. But maybe there was a farewell post, maybe it was deleted. Maybe it's just a coincidence that the person with experience in institutional risk management just decided to leave at a time when it might have been wise to begin closing short positions in MMTLP if by chance GTS Securities held any. Paul Adcock joined GTS Securities in September 2023 as Managing Director and COO. It should also be pointed out that this wasn't publicized on the GTS website or LinkedIn account. Adcock's extensive experience with the NYSE Archipelago, which later became NYSE ARCA, among other positions in the securities industry, shows that he appears to be a highly capable individual. Seeing that Adcock was brought on as both Managing Director and COO gives the impression that GTS needed his experience and expertise, possibly in terms of strategy and operational leadership. This is purely an assumption based on the potential dual role of a Managing Director/COO for a high-frequency trading firm. Why would GTS be bringing on this one person to shoulder such a significant role? Could it have had anything to do with Ari Rubenstein having been missing for months already at this time? Whatever the situation is at GTS, Adcock's time there was short-lived. After only 6 months, he announced his departure, and just like when he joined, there was no announcement from GTS regarding his departure. Ryan Sheftel was with GTS Securities just 4 months short of 9 years. Sheftel reached the level of partner, but he found himself leaving GTS the same month that Adcock came aboard. Sheftel began a new position at another company just 1 month after leaving GTS, but as head of trading, which is one step below partner in most cases. It's perfectly reasonable to begin one step lower than partner with a new employer, but I find it interesting that, as head of trading, Sheftel will be responsible for overseeing all trading activities. Did he have a similar role at GTS? If Sandy Lionetti made herself available to answer questions, it'd be interesting to know why she left GTS Securities. Did her superiors disagree with her input concerning risk management? Was it only a coincidence that Lionetti left GTS the same month that S1 process began for privatization? Ryan Sheftel might be able to corroborate Lionetti's responses, but also he should be able to verify if GTS traded TRCH, MMAT and/or MMTLP as part of their own proprietary trading strategies. If so, Sheftel might be able to estimate the financial exposure GTS faced if trading took place after December 8, 2022. Being that Sheftel was on his way out, as Paul Adcock was on his way in, Sheftel's insight into why he left GTS, along with anything he might know about the choice to bring in Adcock, could be useful. Then there's Paul Adcock. Even if he was in the dark concerning GTS and their April 2023 NYSE and NYSE ARCA disclosures, when he considered taking the position in September, wouldn't it be obvious due diligence to research their broker check report? Why was he asked to join GTS Securities as both Managing Director and COO? How bad was the situation given that with all of his experience, after 6 months, he determined that he wasn't a good fit? I'm sure you can think of more questions like, where's Ari and what's the share count? How is it that all of these exchanges seem to have accurately profiled GTS as a bad actor, but FINRA and the SEC appear to be reserving judgment and hiding behind 2 very flawed FAQs?